This is Limelight America. Here's your host, Michael Drew Shaw.
Thank you, Lynette, and welcome to Limelight America, where we present one-on-one personal conversations with interesting people from all walks of life. These up-close encounters with people of the fascinating and inspiring kind include business, entertainment, sports, and artistic entrepreneurs, scholars, role models, and philanthropists who impact the quality of life for us all. In the early 1970s, Michael Herbert and Larry Adelsberger started PT Services Rehabilitation with 5 employees and a focus on rural northern and central Ohio. They did pretty well. They opened offices in Defiance, Tiffin, and other small towns where the relationship between these entrepreneurs and their growing number of employees evolved into one big happy family. Well, they sold their successful venture in 1998 to a much larger company. But that's not the end of the story. Over time, the healthcare industry underwent major changes that began to impact how PT services functioned on a day-to-day basis. These guys were concerned that industry demands and evolution would limit the kind of one-on-one philosophy that was the heart of the company they'd founded. So they bought it back, and they have never regretted it. Nobody forced Larry and Michael out of retirement, and there wasn't a crisis inspiring them. They just did it because it was the right thing to do. Our next guest on Limelight America is Art Volo. The best way to describe him is a radio aficionado extraordinaire. Arthur has followed the careers and the evolution, the careers of many very well-known broadcasters throughout the country. He has followed the evolution of radio from its early informative years, back in the early to mid-'60s, to the present day. And so he has, I'm sure, some thoughts on what has happened to the industry in terms of group ownership and so forth, and the creative aspect. We find Arthur in Los Angeles, California this morning. We'll find out why he's there in a moment. But anyway, Art, welcome to Limelight America. Nice to have you on.
Hey, Mike, very good. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
We've met several times and talked periodically over the years. I guess the best way to do this is for our listeners. First of all, connect us geographically. Where's your base?
My base is in Novi, Michigan, which is a northwest suburb of Detroit. I work primarily out of my home. For years, I had an office in Southfield, which is sort of the media center of the Detroit area. When I moved to Michigan, everybody was listening to the Detroit stations, and I was gravitating towards the station you worked at, WTOD in Toledo. And I don't know, I always think it's cool to listen to, the stations that are not the norm. I don't know why. I always wanted to be different. Now, if I can skip ahead to the immediate future, is internet radio. And now people with their computers or with an actual internet radio device can listen to any station in America that streams on the internet, and most of them do, clear as a bell. And that's the new way. And for those of us who came up old school, listening through static and fading in and out signals and what have you, to be able to hear a station, from clear across the country.
We're talking with Art Volo, who is wiping the sleep out of his eyes, probably on his second cup of coffee out in Los Angeles this morning. We'll be right back. This is Limelight America. It all started in 1952 in a small laboratory on the campus of Purdue University. A corn farmer who taught agriculture on the side had developed a hybrid yellow corn that popped open more widely and more efficiently, thus eliminating almost all of the old maids, as his grandfather used to call those unpopped seeds at the bottom of the bowl. The new corn was considered too expensive by the established popcorn companies who turned him down, so the Brazil, Indiana entrepreneur, unwilling to give up, started selling direct to retail grocers. By 1976, Orville Redenbacher's gourmet corn was well on its way to becoming America's best-selling popcorn.
You're listening to Limelight America with Michael Drew Shaw on the LA Radio Network.
Our guest from Los Angeles, Art Volo, who probably knows more about radio in general, collectively, than maybe anybody, certainly more than most people I know.
I used to make little lists. I remember working at a store, actually, that sold small appliances when at least that was the department they put me in, which I was trying to upgrade people from AM radios to AM FM radios. And I used to print up these little lists of all the FM stations and say, well, if you buy an AM-only radio, here's what you'll be missing. And I show them this big, long list of all these FM stations. And people had no idea there were so many FM stations of such varying formats and what have you. So I would wind up selling them a slightly more expensive radio, which, of course, the store owner appreciated. And I started to think, I bet you there are a lot of people that don't know what's on the dial because we print TV guide, but we don't print radio guide. So I decided to print a radio guide, and I started that back in I started messing around with it in the 60s, but it was in the early 70s, shortly after I graduated college, that I really got into that in earnest. And at the same time, over the years, have probably published well over 100 million radio guides in conjunction with different stations in different cities around the country for their listeners, so that when they travel out of town, they can find stations in other cities of their liking. It saddens me to see what's happened to our industry. It's there was a time when DJs on the radio were major stars, where radio stations had 8x10 glossy pictures like movie stars had, where they would autograph the pictures. I'm here in Los Angeles now, visiting a friend of mine, Shotgun Tom Kelly, one of the biggest names on the West Coast. And he was a big radio personality in San Diego. He is now becoming as big, if not bigger, in Los Angeles than he was in San Diego. So there are a few that are saying he's not a morning man, he's an afternoon guy, which is highly unusual. And he's doing very well in both ratings and he's doing very well financially. But that's rare. I told him, I said, Tom, you're probably one of a half a dozen left in the industry with the kind of position and the kind of success that you're enjoying.
Let's go back to the number of choices, the number of radio stations and the signals, and we'll talk about how that has impacted radio as an industry. The same thing can be said of television. There's so many cable channels available, an overabundance of stuff. It's almost too much, it seems. Same thing is true with radio. It was in the early 70s, 72, 73, in that era, where FM reared its head, and all of a sudden AM, for the first time in its history, was on the run, so to speak.
It was in jeopardy. The obituary for radio has been written many times. Unfortunately, things won't get better until we stop letting Wall Street manage us and Madison Avenue program us. And what that means is that we have to stop letting the stock market. Of course, now there are broadcasting companies whose stocks are worth a penny or less, which is very sad commentary.
It's been nice talking to you. As one of my favorite lines, I'll borrow from Charles Osgood again. I'll see you on the radio.
Very good. Thanks so much, Mike.
You're listening to Limelight America.
Now another chapter from Tom Feldenstein's The 10-Minute Marketer's Secret Formula. This just in. Your prospects and customers are tuned into the broadcast world. Your target market is reachable by the airwaves. Joe Marble, a real estate agent in Minneapolis, had a lifelong love for and connection to the Minnesota Twins. Joe made an agreement with the Twins to shoot his cable TV commercial inside their stadium, the Metrodome, while the team took batting practice. Joe assembled his family and friends to pose as real fans watching the game behind him. When he yelled action, it was like he was standing on the field during a live game talking to his audience. The impact on his small business was astounding. It gave him a lot of recognition and a lot of listings for his real estate business. Joe measured the results and ended up realizing that he used to throw away money in magazine ads that reached 30,000 homes with little or no results. His commercials were seen by 170,000 people at $25 per spot, making the exposure and dollar per exposure much cheaper and much more effective. Joe Marble has found the guerrilla benefit of television advertising. Whether you use radio, television, or cable TV, the airwaves will reach your clients. Deciding whether it is good for your business will depend on your target, product, and guerrilla attack. Many businesses and organizations don't consider advertising on radio or television because they think it's too expensive. While this may be true for advertising on primetime network television, there are other affordable, guerrilla-friendly on-air alternatives. Let's start with radio. 90% of men, women, and teens listen to radio, a good medium for a very mobile society. Your radio ad can be heard while people are driving, jogging, walking in the park. Consider this question as you decide whether radio is right for your business. How can I sell in 60 seconds? Crafting your marketing message to fit that slot is the challenge of using radio. Radio marketing strategies should accomplish the following. They should increase customer traffic to your location, identify your building and positioning, promote special events, generate leads from a wider target audience, forge a closer relationship with prospects, help to communicate emotions, reach prospects and customers you otherwise might not be able to reach, and act as a direct response mechanism. Not every radio station has the same format. Stations target certain demographical groups. The mere turn of a dial can present your message to listeners who prefer talk radio, rock and roll, or easy listening. You need to pick the right station. Radio advertising clearly must address the first A, attention, of the AIDA formula. Grabbing attention in radio is like writing an attention-grabbing headline. You only have a few seconds to snag the listener. Make sure your identity comes through. Make a call to action. Tell the listener what to do. And do all of this over and over and over. And do all of this over and over and over. That's Radio 101 in a nutshell. Now let's take a look at some actual ad copy for radio. Books A Go-Go, the bookstore with more variety, is clearing out its old inventory this weekend only. Visit the large warehouse at the end of the Main Street strip next to the Perlman Building in Todd's Corner. Now, this brief paragraph can either be a 15-second ad by itself or a 15-second introduction to a longer one. Now, the next part is getting your commercial on the air. You don't necessarily have to hire an ad agency. Call your radio salesperson. They're the experts. They can make it easy for you. Repetition on the radio builds awareness. The frequency you need can be affordable, but it must fit into your overall marketing budget. The size and quality of the listening audience has to be evaluated. How many listeners does the station reach? Are the listeners made up of business owners and managers, or do they consist of mostly working women and teens? Using a station rate card, you can easily calculate your cost per message per person. As with any guerrilla program, constant planning, measuring, and evaluating will determine how long radio stays a part of your guerrilla marketing mix. Radio is effective when used in combination with your other marketing. Now on to television. Now, you might be thinking I'm too small for TV advertising, or it costs too much, or TV advertising is for the other guys. If these things were true, we'd just stop this chapter right here. Mention television and immediately people think big company advertising. But with the growth of cable and regional television, a small business can benefit, just like the big guys. Look at how cable stations have popped up everywhere. All these channels need advertising revenue. Many stations are offering very affordable rate packages within easy reach for small guerrilla businesses and organizations. TV advertising is powerful. Used incorrectly, this power becomes negative. A bad ad will cause you to lose customers. People pay attention to marketing in the following order: graphics, headlines, bullets, and then text. Television uses headlines too. You only have a few seconds to grab a viewer's attention. The headline must be the strong opening to a simple and clear message that stresses benefits. This all has to be done visually. Television advertising is nothing more than using the same headlines and the same marketing message while adding on television graphics and visuals. That's what skyrocketed MTV to success. They added visuals to songs. Read each line of your radio ad or your print ad and think of an image that portrays that message. That's what television programming and advertising is all about. Because television advertising is so visual, viewers will remember more how they felt watching the ad than every detail of the ad. You want them to feel good, but also feel informed, persuaded, and motivated enough to buy. Speaking with a clear message to your target audience is key in any advertising, but especially on television. For instance, women purchase 60 to 70% of legal services for accident injuries. TV advertising in this case has to speak directly to a female audience with a very, very clear message. Typically, that message should be relationship-oriented and communicate a high degree of trust. Products, services, and businesses gain instant credibility if they advertise on television. As seen on TV, puts you in the big leagues in the eyes of your prospects and customers. A television target audience will call you if you tell them what to do, what's in it for them, and how they can reach you easily. They will want to know your location and your toll-free number if you have one. Television advertising can be expensive, so make sure you evaluate the ad budget needed to generate your expected profit level. Return on television ads takes time. Factor that into your budget. Finally, cable television. Just look at all the cable TV stations that have emerged over the past several years. Tune into your satellite dish, and the choice of channels is virtually endless. These stations are supported by advertising just like network television. With the increased number of stations, cable television advertising has become a lot less expensive than traditional television ads, making it affordable for guerrilla marketers. Just ask our Minnesota twin gorilla, Joe Marble. Christina Jones prides her company on its philosophy of hiring based on ability rather than experience or age. She should know. At 19, she started her first company. In her late 20s, she founded PC Order and revolutionized the computer market, providing real-time product information and directly linking distributors, reseller, and manufacturers with tools they need to sell products and disseminate product information over the internet. With $21 million in sales, Christina could sit back and enjoy the fruits of her labor, but instead, she often works weekends. Building the success of her business is still her favorite pastime. Young Payak immigrated to the United States from Seoul in 1956 with $50 in his wallet and little knowledge of the English language. Yet what he lacked in capital, he more than made up for in self-assurance and determination. He put himself through school bussing tables. 19 years later, after working with various steel companies, Payak established his own company and sent shockwaves through the industry with his innovative ideas. Despite the skepticism of his peers, Payco Steel and Engineering captured a majority of the market in just 10 years and diversified into product inception, development, testing, and manufacturing. I might have had only $50 when I came here, he says, but I knew my natural talent was worth a lot more than that. There are a lot of lists in Western Pennsylvania. Two of the most prominent are Fastest Growing Company and Entrepreneur of the Year. Carol Harris is on both. After 8 valuable years of experience working her way up from receptionist to regional sales manager with a major temp service, she started her own company. That was back in 1987. Carol Harris Staffing now has 3 offices serving a wide variety of clients, from Fortune 500 companies to small legal firms. High ethics, respect for her employees, and exceeding her customers' expectations. Those are the ingredients that put Carol Harris on another list, the best women in business. 18-year-old J.C. stepped off a train in Kansas City, Missouri in 1910 with a battered suitcase, youthful enthusiasm, and big plans. Over the next 56 years, he would overcome poverty and near bankruptcy numerous times. His attitude was, if you're not a quitter, you begin to think fast. J.C. liked one-liners, and one of his favorites, which he came across in 1920, belonged to poet Edgar Guest. "I'd like to be the kind of friend you've been to me." More than 80 years later, that line remains one of Joyce Clyde Hall's best sellers in a $7.5 billion greeting card industry, where Hallmark Cards is the undisputed king.
You're listening to Limelight America.
The human adventure does, as I believe, have meaning and purpose. Henry Luce.
Henry Luce was undoubtedly the most influential journalistic innovator of the first half of the 20th century. As editor-in-chief of Time, he helped create a new form of journalism, inventing the news weekly and laying the groundwork for the modern mass print media. By the time he was 40, Luce had carved out an empire that included 3 wildly popular magazines, national radio programming, and newsreels that appeared every day in 8,000 movie theaters across America. At the height of his power, his words could sway government policy and mold public opinion. Luce was born in 1898 in China, where his father, a Presbyterian minister and missionary, headed a small college for Chinese converts to Christianity. Luce spent his entire childhood in China and, as a result, grew up with an idealized image of America as an unfinished masterpiece of democratic liberalism and capitalism. It was an image he would never fully abandon. Luce emerged from his youth with a deep sense of moral certainty, an unquenchable ambition, and limitless curiosity. He read voraciously and developed an almost obsessive attraction to travel. It was his thirst for knowledge and experience that helped determine the direction of his career in life. After graduating from Yale in 1920, Luce spent a year in England studying at Oxford before returning to the U.S., where he took a job as a reporter alongside fellow Yale alum Britton Haddon. While working together, the two drew plans for an idea they had first discussed at Yale, a new type of weekly magazine that wouldn't simply report the news, but would also interpret it for those who did not have the time, the energy, or the knowledge to interpret it for themselves. Sensing what would become the country's scarcest commodity, Luce named the magazine Time, and designed it to be read in less than an hour. "It'll never work," said other journalists, but the ambitious young man remained undaunted. He and Haddon amassed $86,000, and with a staff consisting only of themselves and 3 other full-time writers, they published the first issue of Time on March 3, 1923. Time quickly attracted a growing readership, doubling its circulation within 1 year. A major reason for the magazine's success was its uniqueness. Unlike other national periodicals such as Collier's and Scribner's, which tended to be more literary, Time was an urgent, news-driven appraisal of the week's events written in a distinctive style that featured brevity, brashness, and shock, and captured the imagination of the growing college-educated public. By 1928, Luce and Haddon were looking for new worlds to conquer and began working on a concept for a business magazine to be called Fortune. He insisted that his new publication be superbly researched and richly produced. To give Fortune more clout, he priced it $1 per issue, a lavish sum for a magazine at the time. But before the first issue could be published, Haddon died unexpectedly of blood poisoning in 1929. Luce was stunned, but he quickly pulled himself together and resumed work on Fortune, which first hit newsstands in February 1930, shortly after thousands of fortunes had instantly disappeared in the worst stock market crash in American history. Despite its unfortunate timing, Fortune was a success and made Luce an important figure on Wall Street. Luce continued to expand his empire by acquiring Architectural Forum, and he began producing The March of Time, a series of newsreels that were heralded as the most imaginative of the era. With Time established as the leader in the field of weekly journalism and Fortune boasting a readership that included some of the country's top business people, Luce turned his attention to photojournalism and introduced Life in 1936. With marvelous photographs, snappy captions, and stories ranging from the maudlin to the spectacular, Life became an instant phenomenon. Although its original print run of 466,000 copies was the largest first-issue printing in magazine publishing history, demand for the magazine quickly exceeded the supply, and copies sold at a premium. Within a year, Life circulation exceeded 1 million readers per week. At the end of the 1930s, Time Incorporated boasted 3 of the top-selling magazines in the country. But Luce had more than business on his mind. He could see the gathering storm in Europe, and through his magazines, he began to prepare an isolationist America for a world war he felt was inevitable. In the winter of 1941, he published his famous essay, The American Century, in which he argued that the United States could determine the outcome of the war, then build a free and orderly world after an Allied victory. The editorial, which ultimately reached tens of millions of Americans, sparked a fierce debate between internationalists and isolationists. But that debate became moot when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor and catapulted America into World War II. Time flourished during wartime, and at the end, it emerged as one of the largest and wealthiest publishing enterprises in the world. In 1954, hoping to profit from the population's search for leisure and pleasure, Luce launched the hugely successful Sports Illustrated. By the end of 1955, Time was earning revenues of more than $200 million a year and would continue to grow until Luce's retirement in 1964. At the time of Luce's death in 1967, Life circulation was 750 million, and Time had a circulation of 350 million. Today, Time and the competitors it spawned bear faint resemblance to the original, but they still owe a great debt to the founder of news magazine journalism. Henry Luce's vision of a magazine that would explain and interpret complex events for a broad audience led to news analysis as opposed to straightforward reporting, and it changed journalism forever. And here's a Luce addendum. Henry Luce is credited with innovating many of the techniques that have become standard journalistic practices. He was the first publisher to emphasize personalities in the news. In Time, he started the concept of group journalism by introducing the reporter, researcher, writer team.
You're listening to Limelight America.
At the beginning of the 1950s, only 9% of U.S. households had television. 86% had them by the end of the decade. Over that same period, the United States was engaged in a technology race with the Soviet Union. This focus on technological superiority contributed to a national reverence of intelligence and knowledge. It was against this backdrop that quiz shows became popular.
Limelight America is produced by the LA Radio Network.